Welcome, everybody. My name is Richard Wilson. This is the Family Office Podcast. If you're on our YouTube channel, appreciate you being here. I'm the founder of the Family Office Club, and we have an exciting interview for you here today. We have Paul Hutchinson with us. He's the co-founder of a multi-billion-dollar investment fund, founder of the Child Liberation Foundation and Liberating Humanity, primary investor and executive producer on the movie The Sound of Freedom, which if you haven't seen that, you should go to Amazon Prime and watch that tonight. It's a really powerful movie. My wife and I watched it together. And he's led over 70 undercover child rescue missions. Personally, I don't know anyone else who has saved as many children or made so many one-to-one impacts on children globally. So we're excited to have Paul on stage with us. Earlier this year, he did an amazing job giving a talk. So we're going to have him back for a fireside chat at our upcoming event, which is the Family Office Super Summit at the Ritz. So welcome, Paul, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Richard. Super excited to spend this time with you and your audience.
Sure. So tell me first about your initial exit that you had from a business. What was kind of the type of company, and what was the story behind that?
My early 20s, I was actually going to be a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist, and got in a major car accident, severed the tendons in my hand, and had to change directions. So I went into business, had some mentors, had some amazing information that came in that helped me get started there that we can talk about later. But my first company was a marketing company that helped people overcome anxiety and depression and PTSD and addictions. A lady by the name of Lucinda Bassett had a program called the Attacking Anxiety and Depression Program. And it was the Midwest Center for Stress and Anxiety. And I own Midwest Center Marketing. We had almost 50,000 people a month calling in off of the infomercial to get a workbook and an audio program to get help with overcoming these debilitating challenges that almost everybody deals with at some time in their life. And sold that company when I was 29 years old for $20 million. Most of it was in restricted stock, but I was rich on paper, and that's what was important to me at the time. And but I've always had a passion for making a difference, a big impact in the lives of other people. And in that space, I couldn't think of anything more important than to help somebody break free of such debilitating challenges that most of us are dealing with every day.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. One of my early mentors was Eben Pagan, and he had a number of educational programs for CEOs, but then he created one called Cool, Calm, and Collected that addressed anxiety or stress, not just for CEOs, but for people in general. So it seems like something where there is a massive need out there since you're able to scale that. So to such a large scale, I guess. So I know your history. So I know that you got into real estate and building a multi-billion-dollar real estate company. So how did you go from selling, solutions for addressing stress and anxiety into real estate? Because those things don't seem very connected at the core of it.
Other than the fact that dealing with real estate causes anxiety, but
Right.
So I sold the company, had some money to work with, started investing in real estate, and I realized if I didn't hire guys smarter than me, I was going to lose all my money in real estate. I was on a stage the other day, and I asked him, I said, how much do you think that I made on my first real estate deal? And everybody's throwing out numbers, $500,000, $1 million. No, I lost $500,000 on my first real estate deal, right? And my next one, I lost another 150,000, and that was my dad's money, right? And so it was a challenge to try to figure that out. But in the beginning, what had happened is my company that I sold, they were buying some products out of Asia. They needed some purchase order financing. And so John Pennington and I put together a company called Bridge Loan Capital. We were doing short-term asset-based lending, hard money lending. And we started out with companies that had a sale to somebody like Best Buy, but they needed to pay the manufacturer in Asia. John knew how to make sure we didn't lose a whole container full of widgets from China to the U.S. and we charged a hefty premium. We were charging almost 5% a month. We had a 60% per year, but in the beginning it was our own money that we were working with, and then some others. And then I got invited to climb Kilimanjaro. There was a a
Nice.
group of CEOs, and in fact, this guy called me. His name is as Travis. Travis called me up and he said, Paul, he said, do you want to climb Kilimanjaro in Africa? And I'm like, no, I haven't even climbed Mount Olympus in Utah in my backyard. What
Right.
would I do? He said, well, we're leaving in about 4 months. You got to give up all your Saturdays. It's going to cost you about $10,000. I'm like, well, then hell no. Why would I give up my Saturdays, pay all this money, go climb a mountain in
Right.
Africa? And he said, well, I'm bringing some of the top leaders that I've ever worked with. And he starts going down this list of guys that have sold their companies for 200 million and whatnot. And about
Right.
halfway down the list, I said, now, when are we going again? Because
Yeah.
I realized that spending the time with people of that caliber would transform my life. And so
Right.
on that mountain, one of the guys I met was a guy by the name of Doug Anderson. And Doug had done over $3 billion in real estate development. He had built
Wow.
9 Ritz-Carltons and 20 schools and more high-end
Huh.
condos than anybody west of the Mississippi. And we became really good friends throwing up at about 19,000 feet, right,
Yeah.
on the mountain. And I
Been there.
took him to lunch every single month for the next year. And after about a year, he said, Paul, he said, I really love what you and John are doing with your bridge company. He said, I like your energy. I'm going to sell out of my construction company and I want to be your partner. And
Huh.
when somebody like Doug says, I want to be your partner, you say, and I want to let you, right? It's
Right.
yeah, bringing on guys like that. And so he helped us change over to doing hard money lending on real estate, not just, widgets coming from
Got it.
China, et cetera. But
Right.
then in 2006, and this is so important for where we are right now in the market and everything else, we were this amazing bull market for a long time and things were going
Right.
well and everybody was making money in real estate. And
Right.
I hired a guy named Don Hartman. Don's resume was the most impressive piece of paper I'd ever seen. He raised $14 billion to bail out the Asian debt crisis in the late 90s. And I mean,
Huh.
he was raising his family in Utah, but he was literally overqualified for everything there. He
Right.
jokes and says, yeah, Paul found me walking around Salt Lake with an unemployed sign. I'll work for equity. But so
Right.
we brought him on, paid him a hefty 6-figure income. 2 months later, he comes into my office and he said, Paul, we're in trouble. Now, this is late 2006, a year and a half before the 2008 crisis that
Right.
just ate everybody alive. He said, we're in trouble. And I said, we, the company, Bridge Loan Capital. He goes, no, we, the country, and probably the whole world. He says, we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar problem. And if you don't
Hmm.
change, you're going to be upside down with everybody in your space. He said,
Right.
lenders will be owners. He said, it was funny. He said, Paul, you're one of the best capital raisers I've ever seen. And John is phenomenal at working with the SEC and making sure that the fund structure is in place. He says,
Right.
you guys don't know crap about real estate. He said, you need to bring on some real estate adults if we're going to end up owning some of the properties. And he said,
Right.
and then he laid out what was going to happen. He had all these
Okay.
third order polynomial equations that were way over my head. And
Right.
and we restructured what we were doing. And instead of doing bridge loans, we decided to go into investing in multifamily in
Okay.
large apartment complexes. And the reason behind it, he said, Paul, he says there's certain types of asset classes in real estate that are somewhat market agnostic. That
Right.
during the good times and the bad times, if you're well managed and you don't have a refinancing bullet and all this crap, you can pay out a pretty decent return. And one
Sure.
of those is B-class multifamily. When in a good market, well managed, you're 97% occupied. During a down market, you maybe are 92. And as long as you don't have to sell it in the down market, then you can pay out a decent return. As long as you're not
Sure.
stupidly leveraged, you can make
Right.
it
Right.
through those times. And so that's when we switched over. We brought on a power team of guys who knew how to manage that type
Okay.
of asset.
Okay.
Ironically, their name was Bridge Property Management, and we were Bridge Loan Capital. They had never run a fund before. We had
Huh.
never managed multifamily before, so we
Sure.
kept the name Bridge and Bridge Investment Group, and grew that to many, many, many billions of assets under management.
Interesting. So did you keep the purchasing of receivables and did you keep the bridge lending going, or is it a complete pivot and you left that behind, or did you have 3 legs to the stool?
No, we at that time we did a complete pivot, and it's
Wow.
because we were lending on things. By that time, a lot of our loans were there were land, there was a developer that he had a
Okay.
bunch of his own cash in. He was waiting for the bank financing and whatnot. And, the things that got hit the hardest during that crash was some of the asset classes that we were in. We were incredibly
Right.
grateful that Don saw that, because we were
Yeah.
in a bunch of land that all of a sudden they couldn't finish developing. We were in some pretty high-end residential properties, and different things like that. And we
Sure.
would have absolutely got eaten alive. In fact, to be honest, we got rid of most of those assets, but there were a few lingering ones that John and I continued to manage even into and through the crisis. We weren't taking any management fees, but our
Right.
integrity to our investors, of them knowing that we were maintaining that position as the GP and working through to the best of our ability to exit those assets, was something that gained us tremendous credibility. And in the market,
Sure.
when the rest of the market lost 30 and 50%, we didn't lose any principal. We paid out a double-digit return. And that's why in 2000, after the 2008 crisis, 2009, 2010, we literally had a 48% IRR for our investors. We were killing it because we were in
Yeah.
the right place at the right time, and we operated with integrity when things were going bad.
Right, right, makes sense. The number one thing that stood out besides just your mission and the scope of impact you've had from your talk on stage earlier this year was you going up and saying the most important real estate in the world is the 6 inches between your ears. And the more, I've read 110 books that were authored by billionaires, and I've interviewed 42 billionaires, and the number of times that grit and managing your mindset and being confident in yourself and optimistic comes up is a crazy percentage of the time. So you brought that up. I didn't know you were going to say that on stage. And what is it about your mindset that allowed you to scale a company and sell it for $20 million and then scale a real estate company to billions of dollars? I mean, what are like 1 to 3 nuggets there that you could share with somebody, no matter where they are in the world and who they are, that would help them?
Um, Many times people ask John, they say, John, did you see the multi-billions in the beginning? And
Right.
he said, no, he said, I was more of a realist. He said, we'd be in this office. It was so small that me and John would turn around and we'd bump elbows, and
Right.
if we turned around at the same time. And we'd had a deal where we needed like $25,000 by Friday. Otherwise we're going to lose the whole deal. And I'm on the phone
Right.
making calls. And John tells the story how Paul, I hung up the phone. I turned around, I put my pinky by the side of my mouth, the Austin Power style. And I said, John, we're going to be $1 billion fund someday, right? And John said, Paul, we need $25,000 by Friday,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
$1 billion's a really big number. But
Right.
then we had the conversation at the end of the day, I remember, where he said, Paul, you realize that neither one of us have the pedigree, the skill set, the background, anything to manage a multi-billion-dollar fund.
Right.
And I said, yes. However, if we build it right from the beginning, we structure it in a way where we can attract the right people, then that's exactly what will happen. And that is what happened. That's what brought in
Huh.
Don. I remember when we flew to Hong Kong to meet Don's old boss. His name was Bob Morris, and Bob was the
Right.
former CEO of Citigroup, their investment bank. I mean, he was there. This is back when Citi was the largest corporation on earth from a capitalization standpoint. And I remember we flew and we sat down at the desk, and I have my pitch book. I have the private offering memorandum. I'm hoping that he's going to give us $20 million, right? And
Right.
he pushes him across the desk and he said, Paul, I don't need to see any of that stuff. And I'm thinking, crap, that was a waste of a trip to Hong Kong, right? He said, I've been watching you for the last 6 months. And he points at me and he said, I know more about your bio than you do. I'm like, oh shit, what's on there, right? He said, I am thoroughly impressed with what you guys have created, the foundation you have put together, the team you're putting together. He said, I don't want to be a $20 million LP. He said, I'd like
Right.
to give you 300 million and I want to be
Wow.
the biggest owner of the GP. And he wanted more than 50%. We actually turned him down, went back and forth over a few months, ended up coming on with that commitment, but not just the cash in, with him focusing full time as one of our partners. And then the
Wow.
credibility that I didn't have as a young kid, I just sold some
Yeah.
companies as an entrepreneur. Now we have that credibility because we build it with integrity from the beginning, and
Huh.
we saw it. We saw that vision. It wasn't any kind of, oh, I don't think I'm good enough. Well, of course I'm not good enough. I don't have a JD MBA from Harvard, but
Yeah.
I can put my efforts in a way where I can create a foundation to attract people like Don, like Bob, and others.
Right, right. So part of what I've heard so far in the interview is to do the right thing, don't use crazy amounts of debt, have high integrity, take care of your investors, don't be limited by thinking, oh, I didn't go to Harvard or we don't have billionaire or $1 billion pedigree behind us. Don't let that limit you. But then also, one of my mentors, Sajin Thomas, always told me to find a blue chip anchor investor. And once you have the momentum of that, just like Steve Schwarzman in his book, What It Takes, he's a founder of Blackstone. He went around and eventually found some Japanese oligarchs to back him, and then everybody else backed him, and then they took off. And it sounds like a combination of all those things is at the core of what's made you successful, despite even you and your partners looking at your own background and saying like, oh, we don't really have the history to for sure make it happen, but you made it happen anyways, I guess.
Absolutely. And I will say one of my keys to success, and you can call this whatever, you can call it karma, you can call it blessings from God, call it whatever you want to. I
Right.
made a decision in my early 20s that a large percentage of my money was going to go to making a significant impact in the lives of other people. Not
Right.
waiting until I was insanely wealthy. In fact, my mentor told me, he said, Paul, he said, make a decision that number from now on is always over 10%. He says the average person donates 2%. Millionaires actually donate less than 2%. He said, make that
Right.
number 10, 15, even 20%, and you'll be amazed at how much easier everything else is to create. Now, I told him this. I said, can I just wait until I'm wealthy to
Right.
start giving my money away? I mean, I wanted to be wealthy so I could be charitable. I didn't realize I should be charitable so I could become wealthy, right? But in reality, I can take a look at all of the charity events I went to, all of the connections I got from those, and
Sure.
even things that had nothing to do with the charity events. I truly believe that these 1 in a billion chances of meeting somebody like Don and meeting somebody like Bob and having some of these big initial investors coming in are all tied to the fact that I chose to give until it hurts early on. And,
Right.
the windows of heaven opened and there were blessings that were there. And so that's absolutely a key to my success that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up as
Sure.
part of the equation.
Sure, sure. How often does your philanthropy overlap with Christianity, or how often does religion come into it just by the nature of the people you meet in philanthropy? I'm just kind of curious.
I will say this. I try to stay away from any very specific religious stuff, but
Right.
there's I've got a closer relationship with Christ than I've ever had my entire life. But
Sure.
unfortunately, there's a lot of people that will use religion as a reason to trust them. And so, they
Right.
create those red flags when they, throw
Huh.
a picture of Jesus behind them in their office when they're scamming people, and so I'm ultra cautious with stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I will say this. I will say that whether somebody thinks that God is a mountain or a cloud or a universe or a Jehovah or whatever else, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
There's a higher power very interested in us doing good.
Right.
And in doing so, there's this universal law of exchange, so to speak, wherein by doing good, it's not just feeling good and being
Right.
happy, but
Right.
and again, you don't want to give money away and be charitable just so that you can make money, but in reality, that works.
Right.
The financial rewards that have come back because of the fact that I'm a good steward with those financial rewards are
Right.
phenomenal. And so
Hmm.
you can call it whatever you want to there.
Sure.
But absolutely there has to be, just like in, even in our healing retreats, even what we do in overcoming anxiety and depression and addictions and whatnot, in
Right.
the 12-step program with AA, an acknowledgement of a higher power is paramount in your success. You have to understand that. And if you don't, you try to work through life on your own and with our own little, minds and whatever we're trying to create, and it is super
Right.
difficult. So, if you are doing good and you're creating good, then absolutely you should co-create with divinity and create anything you can possibly imagine.
Sure, sure. What point in your trajectory did you make philanthropy a high priority? Was that really early on? Was it like once you were halfway to $1 billion in assets?
No, I was earning $2,000 a month. Right.
Okay.
This is when my mentor told me. He said, Paul, he said, make the decision today that that's what you're
Hmm.
going to do. And I'm like, he said, and I think that you should donate upwards of 20%. I'm like, 20%? I said, I have to live on 1,600 a month instead of 2,000.
Right.
He said, and then in addition to that, you should donate up to 20% of your time to making an
Right.
impact. And that was super difficult because
Right.
I tell people this, how does somebody become a partner, let alone a founder of a 20, 30, $40 billion investment fund? Well, you're not a University of Utah dropout, right? That's where I am. The statistical probability of me being where I
Right.
am is zero. The only way I can understand it is that I made that decision when I first started, that I was
Right.
going to give and make a powerful impact in the lives of others all the
Right.
way through, even when it was only $400 a month.
Right, right. Got it. Interesting. I recently interviewed Dr. Robert Cialdini, who's like the grandfather of influence and persuasion. And you said earlier, you're one of the best capital raisers out there. You also get people recruited to your mission now in philanthropy. I want to ask you a question that I asked Dr. Cialdini. What is the master key to influence, whether you're convincing someone to donate $1 million or convincing the CEO of Citi to back your real estate fund or a high net worth investor to put in $25,000 when you need it by Friday? What's the master key to influence in your mind?
A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And a master salesperson, the customer has absolutely no idea they were sold something.
Mm,
There's questions are the answers in the process, and in getting to know the
okay.
person, finding out what their needs are, what's important to them, and then
Got it.
offering what you're selling as the solution to what they're wanting to create in their life. If what's important to
Right.
them is cash flow or security or making an impact or whatever else,
Right.
find those hot buttons with them. Back when I was
Huh.
had the anxiety and depression, what's funny is the exact same skills that I used very beginning selling children's
Right.
videos at $20 a piece, and the same skills,
Yeah.
they were the same skills that I used selling a $2,000 personal coaching program, the same skills getting somebody to put $50,000 into a corporate credit program, and then a half a million into my fund, and then 100 million into the fund, et cetera. It was number one, me truly believing in what it was that I was selling. If I didn't believe in it,
Right.
if I was out of integrity in any way, then
Right.
everything else didn't work. At least for me, because
Sure.
I couldn't be inauthentic in that. I needed to know that
Sure.
this was something that I would put money in, that my grandma, etc. Then identifying what their real needs are. In that anxiety company, I told my guys that were selling coaching programs, if you bring up coaching within the first 10 minutes of your call, you're going to get docked on your pay. It
Right.
can't be coming across as the reason why you're calling. You need to ask enough questions to understand them so that by the time you bring it up, it's coming across as a suggestion based on what you
Right.
know about them, not the reason why you called. And that goes
Huh.
all the way through. It's building the relationship, getting to know them well enough and if after you get to know them, if your product, if your investment, if it's not a fit, don't be selling it to them. Be
Right.
be in integrity, but if it is a fit, once you've found enough information, then you can help them see why it's a perfect fit, and then it's more their decision than it is yours in getting
Got
them
it.
to partner with you.
Okay, got it. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of my early mentors was Jeffrey Gitomer, and he always said that sales is really just getting someone to take action on a path that's already good for them. Like, and then Robert Cialdini's answer was that having an ethical reputation, he thinks, is the master key to influence. And you keep on bringing up integrity, like don't sell it unless it's high integrity, and get to know them first. And it's just a natural progression to what they want. So, very much all three answers kind of mesh with each other pretty naturally there. I want to ask you a bit about your child rescue work. So, how did you specifically get started on your first undercover mission? I mentioned earlier that you have done over 70 of those to date.
That's correct. I My first one was a little over 10 years ago, October of 2014. And I got a phone call from our attorney general. He knew I had donated a lot to child-related charities. Told me about child trafficking. It was a pretty dark subject. I didn't even want to hear about it. I mean,
Right.
that's something you don't talk about at the dinner table, whatever. But he told me that human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. He introduced me to a Homeland Security agent who was in Cartagena, Colombia, and had identified some children. I was invited not only to help fund that, but to play a role. And that's what
Okay.
changed my whole life there. I
Yeah.
had a certain set of skills from a previous life that made me somewhat safe in a dangerous place. But the challenge is that the traffickers had a piece of property they wanted to develop into a child brothel sex resort, kind of a Jeffrey Epstein Island type of a thing. They needed a few $1 million to build it out. They had connections with all these other traffickers. And the plan was this: they needed to get the main trafficker to call the other ones and get them to bring all the kids together at the same place. And so the
Okay.
sting was set up where I would come down as a wealthy real estate investor. And
Right.
it was funny. He called me up, and I was at a conference in Atlanta, Georgia. It was a third generation multi-billionaire conference. I was pitching him on investing in my fund, right? And he called me
Right.
up and he said, Paul, he says, there's over 100 kids. I think we can rescue them all. I need your help. And I
Wow.
said, well, how much do you need? I thought he was giving me
Yeah.
a check. And he said, I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days? I'm like, 2 days? I'm in Atlanta. I can't even go home to change. I says, what do I wear? What do you want? Who do you want me to? I mean, what is it? He says, well, you need to come as a wealthy playboy. Now, at the time of the call, Richard,
Yeah.
I look down. I've got a $50,000 watch on. I've got $2,000 diamond studded cufflinks, right? I've got a suit that costs more than my first car, right?
Right.
And ironically, the suit was super conservative on the outside and bright pink on the inside, right? So I'm like, I think I got the outfit, right?
Right.
And so 2 days later, I'm face to face with the most evil people on the planet selling kids. And
Wow.
in the movie Sound of Freedom, my character turned down Jim Caviezel. I don't want to go, and it wasn't until they gave this picture of this little 11-year-old girl to my driver that I changed my
Right.
mind. In real
Right.
life, I was already there. I'm face to face with these traffickers, and one of them leans
Okay.
forward and gives me this picture on his phone of this child. And at that moment, everything hit me. I'm like, this
Right.
is a real trafficked child, 11-year-old that's being sold. And it broke me down. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
will, I will commit whatever funds necessary to rescue that child and bring her home. And then the real impact for me was 2 weeks later when we were actually in the sting itself. They had brought all of these children, and I'm sitting on a chair. Imagine yourself sitting down right now, and this little girl standing up is no taller than I was sitting down. And I'm
Wow.
looking eye level at her, and all I could see was fear. And I
Right.
made a commitment to myself, to that child, to God, that I was going to dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of
Right.
the earth. And the most beautiful moment of my life was after the agents came, stormed the party, arrested everybody. Child Protective Services people came in with the children, and they started laughing and singing with the children. And that sound
Hmm.
of freedom was the most
Right.
beautiful sound that I ever heard. I started crying.
Hmm.
That's why we named the movie Sound of Freedom. And
Right.
at that point, I turned to one of the agents and I said, I've spent my whole life making money, making rich people richer. I literally, I says, I want to make a difference. I had a Ventador, a white convertible Aventador Lambo that had been on my vision board for a while. I was there. I had hit the goals that I wanted. I was going to buy that in the next couple months. I said, I'm not going to buy that car. I want to write the check instead. I want to help. What can I do?
Right.
And at that point, I was told that he said, Paul, he says, there's a huge demand for things like this that are coming from guys with big egos and big checkbooks. He said, I can't teach
Yeah.
my Navy SEALs how to wear a $50,000 watch and negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. And he said, I don't know of any ultra successful business owners who've had the training that you've had. He
Right.
said, if you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life. So that was the first one 10 years ago.
Okay.
Completely changed my outlook on life as a whole. Now, I will say I wasn't the Paul that I am now, even then. Even
Yeah.
after that, for a couple of years, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson, right? I
Yeah.
had I had a basketball court in my basement. I had 10 bathrooms in my house. I had 8 private
Right.
suites. I had 2 helicopters and a plane. I mean, and
Right.
it was ego energy, and And but over the next couple of years and some of the healing things we can talk about, I completely transformed that energy. But in the beginning, that was necessary for those rescue missions. I needed to
Yeah,
come in as a guy with a big ego and a big checkbook, and that's what the traffickers
sure.
were attracted to. And boom, that ended up being the largest child rescue that we ever did,
Wow.
127 children that day.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, there's one quote stood out to me from the movie, and then I've got a question for you. But the quote was something about how, if somebody produces drugs, they can sell it one time. If you kidnap a child, you could sell it 5 times a day.
Yeah.
And that shows the lure of the industry, unfortunately. So I'm just wondering, like, you're so closely connected to this. If you had children that were young girls, would you even take them to countries like Thailand on vacation? If you did, would you hire private security? Would you put GPS trackers on them? Like, I'm just like
Well,
family offices listening to this or
absolutely.
anybody.
Well, here's what's important to understand, and especially with the family offices that are listening, that the chances of your child being kidnapped from a healthy home and taken in a container into another country, like what you see in the movie, that's very, very, very slim. Now, yes, those things happen.
Okay,
However, the purpose of the movie was to get people talking about this so that we can figure out real solutions. Well, to get real
right.
solutions, we need to understand really where the problem is. People
Okay,
leave the movie Sound of Freedom. They're like, okay, I want to do something. I want to go fix this. You know what? The worst thing you can do is go to Colombia and try to go rescue children. You're going to get shot. You're probably going to get
right,
arrested, right? The
right,
best
right,
thing you can do is go home and hug your children. And people are like, well, how does that help hugging my kids? Well, the majority of children that are being trafficked, that are moved around outside of their home, the majority of those children come from broken homes, a
hmm.
broken foster care program,
Okay,
runaways. And so by keeping a strong nuclear family, you do more to protect your children than anything else. Now, the other thing that's incredibly important is this. Besides the 8 to 12 million children that are being trafficked, there's
right,
hundreds of millions of children dealing with the same kind of trauma in their own homes, in their own neighborhoods. In fact, the majority
right,
of children that are sold for sex, the majority of children that are sold for that sleep in their own beds at night, and their parents don't even know that's going on. Parents need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, "Hey, Dad, hey, Mom, I don't like it when you tell me that I have to hug Uncle Harry because he touches me weird and says we should have secrets outside of you." Or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother's taking pictures of us and now he's telling me he's going to use those against me if I don't do more things with him and his friends. Or I don't like this babysitter because she's showing us pornography
right.
and tells us that we should have secrets. And these are all grooming behaviors, and we need as parents to have a relationship with your children where they know where their privates are, they know where the boundaries are, and they
Right.
can very comfortably come to you and say when something's off. That's the
Sure.
best thing that you can do to help protect your
Okay.
children. Now, in addition to that, if you are traveling somewhere, don't have your kids have an open social media where they are posting where they are, because
Right. Right.
we've taken down so many predators who have identified their victims using social media and identifying where those kids are going to
Mhm.
be, where they are right now, whether they have parents
Okay.
with them, etc. So
Okay. Okay, got it. But in general, going on vacation in foreign countries is not something you should be overly paranoid about. I mean, you look at all the statistics. I mean, maybe it's more likely than in America something happens, but it's still very rare that it would happen, right?
it is, and the best thing that you can do, and I talk about this in my book,
Yeah.
the Sound of Freedom book, in detail, how one of the best things that you can do is actually give your kids some skill sets.
Right.
It'll last their entire life by just
Right.
putting them into some Krav Maga or some jujitsu type
Right.
classes, and giving them that confidence where in any situation, that way you don't have to be a helicopter mom and have a nanny follow them to school every single day. Give them some
Sure.
confidence. And I
Right.
have a lot of my podcasts where I interview one of my trainers, one of the top edge weapons and situational awareness trainers in the world, is named Steve Tirani. He trains the Secret
Okay.
Service and FBI and others. And on
Yeah.
that podcast on Liberating Humanity, he talks in detail about the importance of teaching your children situational awareness
Right.
and understanding how to not just be walking around with their heads in, their earphones on and their heads in their
Sure.
phones, but just simply being aware of what's going on will make them look like less of a target and be less of a target.
Right, right. Awesome. Yeah, great advice. Appreciate that. And how did you get, it's not like you're in the business of pumping out movies every couple of years. So how did you get this independent film to do over $250 million in the box office? Like, what was the creation, distribution of the film like? Do you have any notes on that or something you want to
Oh,
share related
for
to that?
sure. I mean, I'll tell you, as an investor, the probably one of the stupidest investments you can make is into the film business. The returns are pretty slim and none. And
Right.
but I didn't invest in it as to make millions and millions of dollars. I invested because I knew we couldn't take millions of people to see what we had seen, but we could help millions of people feel what we had felt. And
Right.
so we put together the film. That the budget was under $14 million in creating the film. And in the beginning, we went into Hollywood, we went to Sony and Lionsgate and Paramount.
Sure.
They were interested in the storyline, but they wanted
Okay.
full literary control. And they could
Right.
have changed things, put an operator in a precarious position, whatever else. And so we wanted the truth of what had happened on these missions. And so we decided that we would take it to the people by the people. I was the primary investor. We
Okay.
brought the guys up to my private cabin to write the script for a
Yeah.
few weeks and everything else, and then we finished the film. And then at that time, it took 5 years for distribution. Literally, Richard, for the next 3 or 4 years, I thought that I had lost all that money. It was just gone,
Right.
because it literally
Wow.
was as valuable as a cup holder, right?
Yeah.
You put your cup on your CD. That's about what it was worth at the time. And I
Right.
thought, are we the only people that think this is a good movie? Because we were
Right.
shut down by Hollywood and big media. Nobody would take distribution. We were everywhere,
Huh.
was just
Yeah.
completely blocked. And so in early last year, in May of last year, I think I did my first podcast. I had done 10 years
Okay.
of undercover work, and I
Right.
had no social media, nothing outside of that. And and I did my first podcast, got shared about 100,000 times in the next few months. And very soon after that, we were able to sign a contract with Angel Studios, and
Okay.
which was great. Now, it wasn't my doing. There was the team was all trying to, making phone
Sure.
calls and see what we can do. But Angel Studios had an audience already that were conservative
Okay.
moviegoers that got behind causes that were somewhat anti big media already, and
Right.
um,
Right.
and so that movie got the traction that it did because of millions of good people that said,
Right.
no, we want to see this. We want to see what's going on. We're not going to allow Hollywood to dictate everything that comes into our homes. We're going
Right.
to decide what it is we're going to watch. And indeed, it became the number one independent film in the world.
Right. 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 And I guess since it's related to that, P. Diddy list and tapes is going to come out and blow people up, or is that never going to happen, in your opinion?
Well, we would all hope that the Jeffrey Epstein list would come out and blow people up.
Right.
That's the challenge is this. I believe that the feds knew about P. Diddy's escapades for years. I mean, he had been doing these for like 16 years, these freak off parties
Right.
and whatnot. And, with the fact that the NSA has got every single message on our cell phone already in their database, you can't tell me that this
Right.
information wasn't already out there. And
Right. For
unfortunately, a
sure.
lot of things like this, they wait until they have to make a public appearance and taking things
Right.
down. The most valuable thing that they have is those tapes, and
Yeah.
yes, there's going to be a lot more people that J-Lo's gonna be outed. There's going to be, there's so many actors. I used to be a huge Will Smith fan. I loved
Yeah.
him as an
Same.
actor. And then,
Same.
all of a sudden I realized, okay, this is why his wife left him. And these are the parties he's attending. That's not the type of energy and mentor that I want for my kids, et cetera. And back to
Sure.
the Epstein list, I'm just going to throw this out there. If you were an agency that wanted to completely control the votes of a senator, of a congressman, of a federal judge, you want to control those votes forever,
Right.
you get that kind of blackmail on them. You
Right.
you you get them on film on an island doing things with, and that kind of blackmail will control those votes forever. And so why would they want that list to be out?
Right.
That gets out, we vote all these guys out of office and we
They
put new
lose their
people in
leverage.
that. Exactly. They lose their leverage. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
call what it is. It's a sad world when when the majority of our politicians have some kind of dirt on them and can be controlled in some way. And so
Right, right. Well,
yeah,
be
that's
interesting
what's happening.
how the next 6 to 9 months go, or next 3 months go related to that, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
interesting
exactly.
times. Okay, well, just one or two quick more questions, then we can wrap it up. But in anything you've done, you really don't think small. If somebody had spent their whole life building a company and selling it for $20 million, which you did in your 20s, they would probably say, "Oh, that was a big success," right? But you've gone on to do multiple big things after that: build a multi-billion-dollar real estate firm, make a #1 independent movie. So let's talk about what your plans are now for a global solution to what you're most passionate about. Besides the Child Liberation Foundation, you have a new organization called Liberating Humanity. So tell me a bit about like the personal transformation retreats that you do, and kind of what your passion focuses right now, and how you're scaling that in a big way.
And Yeah, I love the question because indeed I don't think that I was put, none of us were put here to play small on this earth, right?
Right.
We have infinite potential. And if I'm going to make a movie, I want it to make a global impact. If I'm going to have an investment fund, I need to have a B behind it, billions.
Right.
And I truly believe that the world is ready to break free of its toxicity. I really do. After 10 years of undercover work, I realized that there's more kids being sold today than there were 10 years ago. And I realized if
Wow.
my goal is to eradicate child trafficking, I'm not doing a very good job doing undercover work. And somehow we need to take away the demand. We need to cure the illness, the toxicity, the evil that's in this world that's leading us down this path where that's even a
Right.
thing in any way. And back to that
Right.
number of 1 in every 4 women that have been a victim. This is a
Hmm.
this world is a dangerous place for children all around. And we need to each take a look in the mirror and say, what do we need to do to really help fix that? Well, what that looks like is 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 what I call an elevation of global consciousness. It's a releasing all of those things that do not serve us anymore. That whatever happened in our past, whether it was things that we did or things that
Right.
were done to us, all of them can be released. We can be forgiven. We can break free of that. We need to come to a relationship with God. We need to be in a place where we can really connect and release those things. I have a book that I'm writing called "Are You Listening?" Not with my hand on my ear, but are you listening with my hand on my heart? Because I
Hmm.
believe that every one of us were born with the ability to feel and recognize that spirit of truth. Every one of my undercover missions, we were being led by a greater power and finding where those kids were and what we need to do to keep safe. Well, in our own lives, we each have to look in the mirror and say, how am I adding and contributing to the negativity in this world? Like I
Right.
touched on earlier, the me 10 years ago wasn't the me today.
Sure.
I had these, I literally had parties in my basketball court in my basement. There were
Right.
150 half-dressed girls and NBA stars and all this crap. It was negative. It was toxic. I was in unhealthy relationships all the way around. And, and I got a phone call from two of my undercover operators. And they said, Paul, do you trust us? And I
Right.
said, yeah, I literally trust you with my life, undercover work. And they said, well, you need to come to this transformational retreat. It'll be the most impactful 2 or 3 days of your entire life. Now that says
Huh.
something, I walked across coals with Tony Robbins standing by my side type thing, right?
Right.
I've been to transformational things, and I'm going to drop a bomb here, but I'm just going to throw it out there because I think it's important for people to know. Back in the late 60s, President Nixon decided he was going to throw a bunch of stuff under the bus and classify a whole bunch of what I call tools as Schedule 1 drugs. Okay, so I
Right.
was told my entire life that psychedelics were as dangerous as cocaine. That magic mushrooms, you could go to jail just as long as you did if you had cocaine in your pocket. And so I thought they were incredibly dangerous. The truth is, they are safer than table sugar. There's never been a case of addiction, never been a case of overdose. However, this is vitally important. I actually just sent a text yesterday to RFK, to Kennedy, because I know
Right.
that he's going to decriminalize a lot of these things, and that can be very dangerous if not done correctly. Because I'm not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high on mushrooms.
Right.
However, when used with a guided meditation and a trained facilitator, there is nothing more powerful in helping people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, releasing childhood trauma, nothing more powerful. And I know I
Mm.
come from a space of knowledge in that space. That's what I did for 10 years in my early 20s with my company and helping
Right.
people with that cognitive restructuring. And so since that time, me, my wife, my daughter, we become master facilitators. We have hosted and facilitated now 62 guided meditation, plant medicine, healing retreats where people do a fully immersive transformational healing experience. Now,
Wow.
I'm not a fan of somebody going to their buddy's house and have some music
Right.
on and whatever else, but when
Sure.
used correctly, and that's what transformed me. I,
Right.
I, my very first experience was the most beautiful, horrific experience of my life, showing me pure empathy. Richard,
Hmm.
I could feel in every cell of my body, I could feel the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom. I could feel the pain of every employee that I had spoken to in an unkind way. But then at the same time, I could feel that perfect empathy of that joy of the children that we participated in the child rescue missions, et cetera.
Sure.
And what it taught me was to be incredibly aware of how my actions are affecting everybody and everything around me. And then
Okay.
from there, I went into a place of learning how to be truly present and releasing some childhood trauma and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a huge
Hmm.
proponent of that. We host the healing retreats, and we're expanding that globally
Okay.
in other countries as well, and helping to change the perception of those tools and the laws around them, so that people can use them to break free of PTSD and addictions, et cetera.
Sure, sure. Makes sense. Yeah. I have a friend that just went through it with you, I think last week or the week before, and said it was amazing. And many of my friends were there actually. I saw a bunch of pictures of people saying hi. So that's awesome. So what is a way that someone could help make an impact through you or connect with you if they have questions, if they want to donate money to something you're working on, get your books, or come to a retreat? What's the best way to reach out?
Would love that. Would love that. The foundation is the Child Liberation Foundation. You can go to liberatechildren.org and get information there. You can donate $10 a month. You can donate $1,000 a month. You can be a freedom fighter and do a percentage of your company's profits and be a big part of that. I'm speaking at your conference. I'm speaking at a bunch of others over the next few months. And if people have big audiences that I can come and share business principles and charities type stuff is super impactful. Just being able to get
Sure.
that voice out there as well. They can connect with me. You can find me anywhere on social media just by typing liberating humanity. And
Okay.
it comes up on all the social media channels, and you can go to liberatinghumanity.com. Or if that's hard for people to remember, if you remember the movie Sound of Freedom, just go to soundoffreedombook.com and it'll pull you right into Liberating Humanity, where you can pre-order the
Okay.
book and everything else there as well. And I would be honored to be able to connect with any of the good people in this network. In fact, with your
Sure.
network, I don't give this away big public stuff, but with the family offices that are part here, if somebody wants to reach out to me directly, just email me at paul@liberateachild.org.
Awesome. Great. Appreciate that. If anyone needs that email, besides just rewinding this, just feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you to Paul. And then December 10th to 12th, we're hosting our Family Office Super Summit. And Paul is going to be one of our fireside chats there, where I'm going to be interviewing him on stage. So please check out that event as well at familyoffices.com. But appreciate you being here, Paul. I know I've been connected for quite a while, and it's awesome to see the focus and intent you have and the obvious fulfillment you get from the mission that you have. Most people are passionate about business and scaling and kind of leave it mostly at that level, and they're very private about their impact. And you're the exact opposite of that. So you really stand out compared to most other family office folks that I work with for that reason. So I appreciate your time here. Any last comments before we sign off?
Truly, truly grateful for your time. And, to that last note, it's let your light so shine among men that they can see your good works. So it's okay. It's okay to show the good that you're doing in the world, because it will inspire other people to do the same and be a part of what you're creating. So thank you, Richard. Incredibly grateful for
Awesome.
you, for what you've created, for your audience, allowing me to share today.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Take care.